You guys didn't let a little snow bother you, did you? Should we make those people on the Zoom session go outside and take a selfie proving how bad it is where they are? Nah, I actually have a friend whose son had a wreck a couple weeks ago on that Friday night when we had really bad weather. So I'm getting extra not wanting people to get out in it after that. Let's see if I can figure out attendance. All of our people that are on the Zoom session, if you guys could type your name for me in the chat, then I'll be able to refer to that later after class and make sure I've got everything right. And other than that, I'll try to get everybody. Let's see, I haven't seen Alex. Jackie is gonna Zoom. Dylan is Zooming. Oh, I do have Alex. Hi, Alex. Dylan, Trevor, and Will. Will, you don't have to tell me you're here. You're here. Just some people stayed home and are connected to Zoom, so you're good. I was like, wait, I think that's him, and then I was worried I didn't know who you were. my terrible ability to remember people's names sometimes. I think I have the wrong person. All right, we are ready. Let's do this. There for a while, I was thinking it was going to be worse for this class than it was at 8. That snow kept coming down. It was getting yucky. Today we're going to do some sample methods. So we're going to create some ourselves. This off. Last time we talked about methods and how you create them. And we'll be kind of slow and careful with this because it is an area that can cause a lot of confusion to people. But we want to make sure that it's kind of clear. In order to make sure that it was kind of clear this morning, I thought we should draw a hierarchy chart and just see, you know, our main method is going to call another method. So I went to this tool, Creately, and I wanted to show it to you. And on Creately, it's just a website, and you can use it for free to create all of these different kinds of documents and diagrams that we as computer people like to use all the time. So I clicked on one, and I was like, we'll create a hierarchy chart. Unfortunately, I don't know how to use Creately, and so it was a huge embarrassment, and I just am telling you about it. But we're going to use Visio because I know how to use Visio. Now, Visio is already installed on the computers. And remember, it's one of those Microsoft products that you can get for free through that development tools thing of Microsoft's. If you're trying to access that and you can't, please let me know because the link, Microsoft tends to update links often. And so it's hard to keep that link up to date. So let's find Visio. Now, some people that are at home might not have Visio installed. That's okay, you can just watch. We're not going to create anything that's overwhelmingly major. We just want to keep our thoughts in a picture. You know how much easier it is for us as people to understand things when it's visual. So even for these little hierarchy charts, I'm going to go ahead and create a drawing. I'm going to use the basic flowchart template and then just create. So if you've never used Visio, it's a drawing tool that Creately and all those other ones are based on because it was kind of like the original. And just like a lot of other software, Microsoft bought it a few years back and rolled it into their collection of stuff. We have a shape library over on the side and our piece of paper here in the middle to draw our diagram on. And I just want to grab a process rectangle. And I'm going to drag that out and put it on this chart. And I'm going to double click on it, zoom in a little bit for you, to add some text. And in a hierarchy chart, all we list is the name of our method. So I'm just going to say our main method is going to be our main one, right? It's our starting point. And then I want to grab another process box and put it under that. I did that kind of the old school way. I could delete it and come up here to this other one. And if I mouse down, see how those little arrows show up? I could choose another process box that way, and then Visio automatically puts the line and the arrow in for me. Either way. So the first project that we're going to create is just going to be a little project, and we just want to display some information. So it's going to be kind of like a welcome display for a program. So let's call this one display message. And that's it. That's how simple our hierarchy chart is going to be. So we're going to have our main method of our program entry point, call another method called display message, and that's it. So let's create that project. Let's open Visual Studio. And I'm going to choose File, New Project. And so far, we've always made our project name and our solution name the same. Let's do it a little different this time, so we can have one solution for all of our examples, and we can keep several example projects in there so that they'll be easier to find for you. My location is good. That's where I want to save it. But I want to make some changes. I'm going to set my project name to be display message method. And then I'm going to change my solution name. Notice the project name gets written in the solution name, so I have to change it first. But I want the solution name to be something like Chapter 4 Method Examples. We'll just keep all of our stuff in there together because it tends to scatter. And if we're ready, go ahead and click OK to create that solution in that first project. Great. So the other day, I showed you how we could create multiple projects in our solution, and we left our program.cs file named program.cs for those two different projects. So I mentioned that could be kind of confusing, right? Because we have two program.cs files. So let's rename that before we start doing any code. Lots of ways we can do it, but we have to be careful. So I'm going to right click and choose rename. You could double click to open up a rename box just like in File Explorer. But what I need to be sure of is that the .cs stays on that file. .cs for C#. And if I wipe that out, then I won't have a code file as far as Visual Studio is concerned. So let's name that display message method. Sorry, changing my mind. And now Visual Studio says the name of that file was being used in other places. Do you want me to update all of those places? And yeah, we do. And we'll see that when we say yes, our class name gets updated to match that CS file name. And that's a requirement. Our class name and the .cs file name have to be the same, okay, for things to work. We got it okay? Nothing weird happened? No errors? Sometimes the Solution Explorer will go a little wacky on you. Now, when we're working with our solutions and our different projects, there's lots of different commenting we can do, and I talked about that last time. But today, I wanted to kind of point out that when we comment these particular applications, we're going to be doing commenting for us, like learning comments to describe what we're doing, not the kind of comments we would do at work to say, you know, this is going to calculate, blah, 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 blah. We're going to be saying, I have to have the keyword static, you know, those kind of comments. So to get started, one thing that I like to do that could be annoying, but it's turned out really well, is label these closing curly braces. Why that's important, lots of reasons, but as we're talking and we're trying to identify where we need to add new code, it's really easy if I say go to the end of your main method and we've got that labeled, then you know what I mean. So I'm gonna start out, here is the end of the display message method solution. Above that, the pink curly braces are for the class. So the end is going to be the end of the display message method class. Those two are the same, and that's okay. And then the green curly brace is going to be the end of our main method. I know when I started teaching here, the people at O'Reilly's and Jack Henry were like, why are these programmers labeling their closing curly brace? But now they're okay with it. So I've had some people come back and say that that was really helpful to them. So I try to keep doing it. I stopped one semester. I thought, this is so silly. And then I had someone come in and say, you know, that was like the most helpful thing to me because it helped me keep track of where I was. So different people, different things. Okay. So I've got my program kind of labeled here, and I want to create a new method. I'm going to be calling it from my main, but if I try to put code in my main to call this method that doesn't exist yet, I'm going to get errors. So the best thing for us to do is to create the method first. Sometimes we might just create a header of the method just as a placeholder, kind of like an outline, so that the compiler is happy with it, but we don't have to put the code in until we're ready. Now I'm going to start out our method with that keyword void. This method is just going to display an output message. It's not going to have any output back to its caller. So its return type will be void. After that keyword void, I want the name of the method. And our method is going to be display message. Check in Visio and make sure I don't get it wrong. So after the name of our method, we're going to have a pair of empty parentheses, a close or an open and close parenthesis, because this method doesn't have any parameters. It doesn't have any input and it doesn't have any output. So it's going to be a pretty simple method. Now watch that error. And I didn't notice it to warn the morning class. Notice how where my cursor is right there, the compiler is saying, oh, there's a semicolon expected. It should say a semicolon or a set of curly braces is expected there, because a semicolon is not what we would want. If I put a semicolon there, I would have trouble. What I want there is to begin my method body. And once I get those curly braces in, it'll take a second, and then we'll see that error message go away.
You could put a semicolon there just to like initialize it, right? And make it something else with the class.
If you have a statement that has a body,
Okay, so say if you put that method in an abstract class, something like that.
only if it was an abstract method definition.
And then you would recreate like you would.
Right, only if it was an abstract method definition. So in general, you never want a semicolon at the end of a method header unless you're in a special situation like that. And a lot of people will make that mistake early on, and it'll cause a lot of trouble because it's going to act like you don't have a body to your method, because that semicolon is going to tell it that's the end.
Would it work with a semicolon just as that placeholder if you just wanted that to exist so you could reference it? Like we were talking about?
No.
Okay, so
Because that's not a method. It could be used as an abstract placeholder, but not in general as a placeholder. Yeah. So C#2, you could start using it, but not this semester. To stay away, because one of the biggest problems beginning C# programmers have is putting semicolons at the end of statements that shall have a body instead. And so then they wipe out their if statement body and stuff. So we're going to be careful about that. Now in our method here, we'd like to display a nice welcome message. So let's just do a console write line. And we'll just say something wonderful. Welcome to our application. And now the next line, I'd like to write out the date and the time, our current date and time. In chapter 3 of our textbook at the end, I mentioned there's a whole bunch of stuff that you'll be wanting to refer to later. And they talk a little bit about doing date time type things there. It's pretty simple. Let's try it. What I want to output is date time dot now. And that should give us the current date and time. If we run our application right now, nothing's going to happen, right? Because we don't have a call for our display message method. So let's go to our main, because our main is still going to be our controller. It's always controlling what other methods get called. And let's call display message. IntelliSense is helping me there. Because display message is a method, I have to have an open and closing parenthesis at the end of it to show that I don't have any input arguments to pass. I'm getting an error. Are you getting an error? What's it say?
So that it's a object reference or object reference spread for a non-static field method or property.
Static, you are right. When we work with our main method, main is a static method. That means this main method can only be loaded into memory once, which is kind of a normal situation. But we'll see how that can be changed when we work with objects and object-oriented programming. But anytime we're working with our main and calling methods directly, we have to add that static keyword. So we should be able to run it now. I'm going to do Control F5 to make sure my output looks good. So we get our nice welcome message and the current date and time. I'd like to format our date and time maybe a little different. What do you think? We could do some fancy formatting. If you remember in our textbook, I was looking at some stuff there. If you remember in our textbook, they showed us how we could do formatting in our write line. I'm going to add that in. So this time I'm going to print out the date is, and then we're going to use a parameter 0, but we're going to do some formatting. We saw how we could use a C to indicate we wanted a numeric data to be formatted as currency, an N to say we wanted it as a number. Bless you. We can also do a lot of other formatting. Here I can say I want to output my date in month, day, day, year format with hours, minutes, seconds, and then our universal UTC time. And then after the the end of the formatting characters, I need to close that parameter, close my string, and then with a comma, I can list what I want formatted. And I want datetime.now. So we'll see how that formatting string changes the way that date and time gets output. So the first date is just the standard. You can tell it's not very different from when we were looking at. The standard formatting drops the leading 0 in our month, whereas the formatting we use didn't drop that leading 0. Notice some of those details because they can be important sometimes. Our time came out the same, but we don't really have an hour right now with a leading 0. The way they only specified 1H, we should drop them. And then the last thing, the ZZZ, is the universal UTC time zone. If we were looking at Greenwich Mean Time, we're 6 hours off from that. Okay, so we got some great daytime stuff and a nice method that we could use to copy. So if I ever said, oh, I need you to write a method that displays a message, this would be a great place to go to get this. So has everybody got it? Got it all? And it's all working? Okay. Save. Let's create another project. For this one, we're going to have the same type main calling something. So I'm going to copy this hierarchy chart. But this time, instead of calling our display message method, I'd like to create a method that prompts for a string and then returns that string to the caller. So let's call that our method prompt string input. So we'll just have a main, and we'll call this one method that prompts for string input. We can't tell that it's passing any data back unless we added data flow to this hierarchy chart and made it into a data flow diagram. But for right now, we can't tell. We'll be able to tell in our code. Okay, so I want to create a new project. Right-click on your solution and add a new project. So we're going to make this one prompt string input method. Sorry it's so long, but I want you to be able to find them again. So in our example, we're just going to prompt for a string and return it because it's pretty easy. In the REPL that you'll be doing, there's some example code that takes care of numeric data, prompting a user for numeric data and making sure that it's numeric. So you'll have some samples for that from the REPL. I'm going to go ahead and label these. Here's the end of the main method, end of our class, and finally the end of our solution or namespace. So just exactly the same as we did before, we want to go to the end of our main and create our new method. We saw last time that we have to have that keyword static. I'm being able to leave off the access level, public or private. It's defaulting to private, which is fine for us right now, but I'm not being able to leave off that static modifier. Now this method is going to return a string. So I'm going to say the string is our data type. Our method is going to be named prompt string input. And again, we don't have any input to our method, so we can just have open and closing curly braces. Now again, if I am trying to just do some outlining for my code, just as I prepare, when I have a return type, I can't just have an empty method, I'll have an error. So I would have to return, I can type, you know, some sort of placeholder or something in my code that I would go back and fix later so that I could compile, if that makes sense. Sometimes we just want to have all of the outline of all our method names already in, and if we're returning a value, we have to have that return keyword in our method. So what we wanted to do though was prompt our user for an input string. I'm going to use the console.writeLine, and you can tell I'm not using static system.console using statement, just because I want you to get used to the fact that it can happen both ways. 90% of the sample code that you look at online is going to have the word console in front of stuff, because this has not been available for very long. So what do we want to prompt our user? Oh, please enter your name. Now I need a string variable to hold that data. So I'll go ahead and create that variable at the beginning of my method. I'll say it's a string, and we'll just call it temp. It's just going to hold that name temporarily. One thing about C#, the string data type is synonymed. So I can use a lowercase word string, but I can also use an uppercase. Notice that that changes it to the aqua color, which shows it's a string object, and the lowercase is kind of the blue. It really does the same thing either way. Just in case you're a Java person and you know that you can't get away with that in Java. At least not right now. Sure. Do what? Did you get it?
I didn't quite catch what you said just a second ago.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I've lost it. Not important. Okay, so I've got all of this great prompt going here. Now I can use my temp variable to hold what they type. So I'm going to do a console.read line. Now I know when you were working with Python, you were able to use the input command and put your prompt right inside as a parameter of that. So this morning, I want to show you, because someone was trying this and it makes perfect sense coming from a Python background, but it just doesn't work. In C#, the read and the write are completely separate. They don't kind of cross boundaries like they do in Python, unfortunately, because that's a really nice command. But I'll undo that because we don't have that ability, but that's okay. We have other things that we can do that are just awesome sauce.
Apparently Python also is a wild else.
Uh-huh.
Did you know that?
Yeah, because people always have to do it when they're learning stuff, and then you're like, don't do that. No, it's kind of an awkward construct too. All right, so now I've got my data that the user typed in my variable named temp. So all I need to do at this point is return that variable temp to my caller. So we asked for their name, we read it, and then we returned it. So in our main, in the same way, we need to create a string to hold that name. Let's call it user name. Now I could call my method prompt string input and not capture the output. Let's try it. And then I'm going to output with a console write line the name that was entered. The entered name is C#'s giving me an error saying you've never given username a value and you're trying to output it. So what we're going to do is actually use that variable to catch our returned value from our prompt input string. Okay, a couple of other things. I'm going to go ahead and label the end of that method. Now, when we're doing these ending labels, sometimes I'll go really fast because the important part, of course, is our code. And so much stuff to show you. There's so many great things that you can do that we can get to moving fast. So we could just put end of method, end of method, end of class. But as long as we use that word method in class, that's going to help us even remember what those things are. These are methods. So that'll help. Let's run it. Does it work? Huh. I'm getting the output from that other project, and that's not what I want. I want to run this new project. Can you remember how we can make that happen?
It's because you're writing in program.cs, you need to change the name of that.
Nope. What is it? Does anybody remember?
Set the prompt string input method as the startup field.
Yep. So let's right click on it and set as startup project. Good job. We only did that once. Hard to remember all these things. Very good. But we do want to rename that program.cs. It's not causing us any trouble. But we decided when we started this solution that we would rename those things so that we would know which one we're looking at. So let's do that. I'm going to right click on program.cs and rename. And just like our other one, I want to name it the same thing as the project, prop string input method. And yes, I want it to update everywhere. So we've done two things since we ran it. I like to try to keep it to one, but let's see if everything's still good. Control F5. Ah, now it's prompting me for my name like I want. So I'm going to put that in, and I get my message back from my main that the entered name is the name that I put in that method. So everybody working okay? You leave that one up there for you. Chris, are you CJ? Are you CJ? Christopher? Uh-huh. No. Are you okay? Are you sure? And they're talking about all these people with the flu and stuff. We want to send you home if you're sick. All right. If everybody's got that one, then that's great. I want to try a couple of things, though, before we move on. First of all, when you prompt for the user's name, change the write line to a write. I'll show you what happens as a write line so we can remember. It asks me for my name, and my cursor is sitting on the next line, which is fine. Now, if I change it to just a write and run it, you'll be typing on the same line as the prompt. Again, just a matter of preference, but sometimes it's a matter of what the user wants, you know, and well, we don't do a lot of console apps for users, but just in case you need to know. So that's our big difference between the write and the write line, so you can see it. Now with our read, same thing. We have several different types of read commands. What if we try to do just a regular read? I'm waiting here for a second, and sure enough, it goes into an error state, and it says that read reads the next character, so it only reads one character. So that wouldn't help us at all with our problem, because we want to read their whole name. So we'll have to keep that a read line. So again, I was saying try some of those different things to see what they do. All right, the last one that we're going to create is going to be a little bit bigger. We're going to create another project, but we're going to copy some information out of this project because we would like to prompt for an input string. But then I'd like to create a method that updates the string. So let's create a diagram for that. This one will be okay, so here's our two little ones. I'll move them off to the side, and I'm going to update this one. In this new one that we're going to create, our main is going to first call that prompt for input string method. Then it's going to call another method. So I'm going to grab a process symbol and drag onto our diagram. And this one is going to be update string. And I have to use the connector tool to connect this to the main to show that the main calls both of those methods. So that's what a hierarchy chart shows, is what calls what method. So our update string should be an interesting one. Let's try it. I want to create another project. So again, at my solution, I'm going to right click, add new project. And I want this one to be update string method. I want to rename my program.cs. Update string method. Bless you. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to label these before I start copying. End of our main method. End of our update string method class. And finally, end of update string method solution or namespace. Right now I have a bunch of yellow bars because I have a lot of stuff that hasn't been saved. If I tried to run my program, all of those things would automatically get saved. So I wouldn't be able to close without saving. Kind of an important point. Let's copy some code. I want to go to our prompt string input method, and I want to copy our prompt string input method. So I'm going to start with the closing curly brace and get all the way to the header. or start with the header and go all the way to the closing curly brace, whichever way you like. And I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to paste it after the main method in our new project. Now, is everything okay? When you're copying code, as you're getting started, be pretty careful. Be real specific with where you begin and where you end, because this is where we can get curly braces all messed up and really have a lot of trouble. And again, it's not understanding how to code. It's not being able to count up curly braces because we're not used to it. Okay, so now I'm going to copy my main. So I'm going to go back to my prompt. And I'm just going to copy the 3 lines of code in the main method. I'm not going to get any curly braces at all. And then I'm going to go back to my new one and paste. Some other things to notice. As we're creating our methods, notice that all the code within the curly braces is indented, our method body. This is a C# coding convention. It's not a standard. It's not like Python. Python forces you to do that indentation. That's why Python forces you to do that indentation. The guy, I can't remember his name, what's his name, that wrote Python was so sick of seeing programs that weren't properly indented. He said, well, I'll just make a language where everybody is forced to properly indent. Yeah, we did. So we've got to indent to make our code readable. When you're doing the REPLs especially, you're just looking at that black screen with the white and it doesn't have any color coding or anything. If you're not doing indentation, everything's going to start running together and making it really, really hard to figure out. So it's not required, but it's really, really strongly recommended. Okay, so that all looks good. So let's test our program, make sure it's working. I'm going to press Control F5. It prompts me for my name, and it outputs it. Great. So I didn't break it in doing the copying. I'm going to make sure everything was still working there. So now we're ready to create our method that's going to update our string. I want it to be right after our main. It's going to be static, and it's going to return a string because it's going to update the string that we have. And our method is going to be called update string. Now for this method, we are going to have some parameters. First of all, we're going to have a string that is the original, right? What we want to update. We'll call it orig. And then we're going to have another string that is going to be the letter. And I will explain that to you. We're going to call this method passing in our name. And what we want this method to do is take that name and change everything to uppercase, all uppercase letters. But then we're going to look at this letter that was passed to us. And any time we find this uppercase letter in our string, we're going to convert it to a lowercase. So we'll end up with mostly uppercase, but one letter being lowercase throughout our string. So let's see if we can code that. The first thing we want to do is change our original string to uppercase. So let's do some Googling. I'm going to start out my search with C#. And then what would be a good thing to put next to try to find some sample code on how to do an uppercase conversion? Do I? Uppercase? That sounds good. Let's try it. Oh, that looks pretty good. It says that you can use the string.toUpper method. Let's see. It looks like in this site, this culture info, I'm not super familiar with their site, but it looks like they have some sample code. So I'll click on that and see if it's going to give us a sample. Here's one. They say string 2 should be set to string 1 to upper. Now they're passing in some culture info to say that we're in the United States. Our computer systems are already set to default to that. So you'll see we don't usually have to worry about the culture info, but you will have to a little bit in the REPLs. So I would be able to leave those parameters empty. So let's try it. String dot to upper. So I'm going to set our original variable equal to our original value to upper. And if you notice, as soon as I type that variable name in the period after it, IntelliSense gives me a list of all of the valid methods and things that I can do with the string anyways. So if I was thinking it's probably to upper, I could have searched through that list and found it. So I'll put my open and close parentheses saying I want to just accept the default parameter value. Now, if I return that original string at that point, it should be in all uppercase. So let's test it. In order to test it, I need to update my main to call this new method. So in our main, let's add this. First, I want to output a line of like all dashes, kind of a separator. Then I'm going to call our update string method. So it's going to be giving us a new username. But we're going to pass the current username to it. And then I think I'm going to send it a letter E. And then finally, I'm going to output updated name. We haven't done much commenting. Let's put some stuff in here. First of all, in our main, let's start at the very beginning. What's this first line of code doing? Who wants to tell me what this first line of code is doing? Declares a variable. Very good. Good reading. Next. Update our username by calling our method. Then we're going to output the username. And we're going to output a placeholder just so that we know we've hit that spot in our code. Now, finally, we're going to call the update method. And then we're going to take our output from the update method and output it. So let's try it. right now, this letter E that I'm passing in is not doing anything in our method because we haven't implemented that part. But we should be seeing an uppercase version of our name. Make sure you make this your startup project, our update string method. It looks just like the other one. And I'm going to run it. And there's our updated name. That's all in uppercase. So we accepted that name as a parameter, as input into our method. In our method, we changed it to all be uppercase and then returned it as output. Now I'd like to replace that letter, and I passed in an uppercase letter E, and that's the letter that I want to replace. Every place there's an uppercase letter E, I want to convert it to a lowercase letter e. So in order to do that, first of all, I'm going to need a variable. And we passed in the letter in uppercase, so I'm going to have a variable called lowercase letter, and let's set it equal to our letter dot to lower. We're just doing all sorts of terrible things. And then I want to use the replace method in C# to change this string. So let's go do some Googling. So I'll search for C# string replace. And the first thing that comes up is some documentation from Microsoft. Let's take a look at that. Now it's really important to be able to interpret this kind of documentation, because otherwise it'll be hard to figure things out on your own. I'm scrolling down and I'm seeing if there's some sort of example that's meaningful to me, because there's going to be some examples that really don't have anything to do with my frame of reference. But this one down here at the very bottom sort of does. It talks about S. And it says S equals S replace the letter A with the letter B. It's got some more stuff. But I'm going to focus on the fact that I put what I want to replace as parameters into this replace method. So our original string, we can use it to replace find replace in the list. There it is. Look, there's even a reverse. And what I want to replace is every time I find that letter that's in uppercase, I want to replace it with the lowercase letter. And now my original string should be all in uppercase except for the letters E. And you can pick any letter. Right now, when we have something like this, where I have it kind of hard-coded in our test case, that's what this is. This is a code tester, and I'm putting something in here in a hard-coded way, assuming that on down the road, later, I'll be adding code to prompt the user for that information. But I haven't yet, so I'll go ahead and put a value in to use for my testing. I use the E because if you've noticed, I have a lot of E's in my name. You might want to use some other letter for your testing, so you could change that letter to E to whatever letter was meaningful in your name. Okay, let's run it. So there's my updated name. I have some uppercase letters and all my E's are in lowercase. Now, you might not ever want to do that in any of our assignments, but I want you to at least have the code that shows you what you could do, because there could be an assignment where it says to replace something with something else, and it's kind of common for us to need to do in the real world. Okay, so we're all good here. Is everything working? Got them all going? Everybody's good? I'm going to do a save all and close out of Visual Studio, or at least minimize it. And I'm going to go look at the REPL and make sure we can all get to it and all that kind of good stuff. I think I'm in the right place. So we should be here at lesson 4, the lesson 4 REPL course. I'm going to click on that. Make sure the link is good. I think it's taking us to the right place. This morning I was sitting here on this screen looking at all the assignments, talking to everybody, and all of a sudden it came up with this beautiful 404 error, and they were all like, oh, we can't do it, it just disappeared. And so we clicked refresh, and it all came back. So that's the joy of REPL. If it goes wacko on you, make sure to refresh, and it should reload. We've only had times once or twice where it still continued to give everybody problems, and then we have to update dates. Okay, so this one doesn't have a whole bunch of activities, but some of these are substantially more involved than some of the ones in your earlier REPL. So you should be able to move through it quickly, but really pay attention and watch what you're doing and be thinking about how this code that you might be seeing might look different from what we just did. Lots of ways to do things. As you're doing this one, you're going to be creating some methods, and you might run into trouble. So I'm going to pretend I'm a student here. And in this first REPL, I've done something, and it's driving me crazy. I've spent an hour, I've wasted all this time, I can't stand it, I'm going to go psycho. Go ahead and submit that. And when REPL comes up and says, are you sure your output doesn't match? Say yes, submit anyways, and get on Discord or email me and say, hey, in the lesson 4 REPL 1-0-1, I just submitted it to you, I've got an error. Then when I get on, I'll show you what it looks like to me. As someone did this morning. So I wish that REPL would send me an email, but they don't. But to me, when I go in, I can see, oh, there is one, yay. So here's someone who has a question from the other class about this one. So when I, as the teacher, go in and see that, I can click on it, and I can actually run that person's code, and I can see exactly what's wrong, and then I can write a message to them and send it back. Now, I don't know what it looks like on your end, because it's really hard to tell with all the student stuff, but that's the whole idea of REPL, is let's get it done fast. You know, we have that 5-week C# class in the summer. How do we make it through in 5 weeks? Because of this. Because when students were working and they ran into problems, they would submit it to me right away. And because it's summer and we're trying to get all this done in 5 weeks, I tried to respond as fast as I could and say, here's your problem, so that they could keep working. Because that's what happens and what slows us down, right? You guys are working at 1 in the morning and you send me a message and I don't get to it until the next afternoon because that class is in the morning and stuff. And so that really slows you down. With the REPL, the way they have it set up, they're trying to avoid that wait and that turnaround. So if you send me a message, I'll try to get to it as quick as I can. A lot of times it's a curly brace, so you won't want to hear that, but a lot of times it really is as easy as saying, are you missing a curly brace at the end of this method? And so it can be pretty quick just to solve. that's what we want to do. I know it goes against all of your better judgment to go ahead and click submit when it's telling you it doesn't match, but we'll fix it. Okay, that's what we're going to do for our lab time today. Are they giving you a hard time? A hard time over there. Logan's getting a hard time in the chat, obviously. Feel like I'm watching. So that's what we're going to do the rest of the day, working on this REPL. Let me know if you have questions, problems. If you go home to do it, do send me a message if you send me something like that, because this person, you know, I wouldn't have seen this if we weren't looking accidentally. And you know how sometimes you don't go looking for trouble. I might not be aware. But let me know if you have problems or questions. Any questions about anything before we? You got it.